Welcome. This is DraftSight for SolidWorks users. Hopefully no one was confused by the topic. So 2D still matters, and that's one of the things we're going to discuss today. So we're going to have a little introduction. We're going to talk about why 2D is still relevant, perhaps not as relevant after the session this morning, but hopefully it's still going to be around for a little while longer. We're going to do a little comparison between DraftSight and what we now call SolidWorks Design, which is the CAD software. We're going to talk some techniques in order to work with DraftSight, and we're going to do some example use cases. And before I get started, let me kind of poll the audience and maybe set some expectations. So how many of you have ever done 2D drafting? And I'm not talking about taking a SolidWorks model and making a 2D drawing. I'm talking about 2D either in that other CAD or DraftSight. Oh, good Lord. I hope you're going to learn something. So this session is not about it's obviously not replacing SolidWorks with DraftSight. We wouldn't want to do that. It's trying to get you more comfortable in a 2D environment, but it seems like a lot of you are already so. So hopefully you'll pick up some things along the way. And then we're going to have a conclusion and maybe a little bit of discussion, hopefully. So I'm Mike DeKoning. I'm a technical solutions consultant for TPM. We're a SolidWorks reseller, and obviously we sell DraftSight, and we do a lot with DriveWorks. So as a TSC, as we like to call it, we love our acronyms, right? My roles are I'm a consultant, an implementer, an instructor, and a programmer. And actually my main focus when I came to TPM in 2019 was data management. So mostly SolidWorks PDM, a little bit of SolidWorks Manage. I have a CPAP, is it called now? Used to be the CEPA when it was EPDM, so SolidWorks PDM. The professional design for SolidWorks mechanical, and then the DraftSight professional. There's a DraftSight professional certification which came out, I think, last year. I was a former CAD administrator at a large company, supported DraftSight, SolidWorks, and SolidWorks PDM, and was part of the team that when we went from the other CAD system to other 2D CAD system to DraftSight, I was part of the team that figured out how we were going to make that transition. Oh, the wrong button. And more to the point, I guess, I was a mechanical designer doing 2D work for 12 years. I'd actually done 3D work on a CAD system that's no longer around. It was actually before SolidWorks even came out. So I went from 3D to 2D and then PDM administration. So I also teach we teach DraftSight Essentials at TPM, and as of now, I'm the main instructor for that because I have the experience with it. So I want to talk a little bit about why 2D is still relevant. So it's kind of a universal language. It's been around. This is, I believe, the Da Vinci invention, but it's well known and understood. And we use SolidWorks to make 2D drawings from our models. So it's still a valuable artifact today, and probably will still be for a long time. I have legacy data. My former company had over 200,000 DWG files. It did not make sense to convert all those to 3D. So we told our users that even though they were going to use SOLIDWORKS day to day, they would still need to, now they had the 2D skills from using that, so they would still have to go ahead and use DraftSight in a lot of cases just to do minor modifications. Most companies still have DWG files, DXF files that they need to modify, maybe even do some cleanup on. Speed and simplicity. So there are a lot of cases where it makes more sense to actually have a drawing without a 3D model. Some examples, fluid diagrams or electrical schematics, if you don't have a product that will generate those for you, like SOLIDWORKS Electrical. Well, the schematics there, and then also facility layouts, floor plans. We had a lot of those at my former company that we would go back in, and those we would work with 2D. We didn't make 3D models of the plants or the facilities. So I guess you all use SOLIDWORKS as well? I should have asked you. Okay. So there are a lot of similarities between the interface. You see on the top there's SOLIDWORKS, and at the bottom you see the DraftSight interface. And you see, I'm not going to read this list, don't worry, but there are a lot of things that are very similar between the two applications. I will point out a few of these. Mouse gestures, power trim, recently opened files, dialog box, and toolbox. These were actually inspired, in some cases came directly, mouse gestures and power trim in particular, came from the SOLIDWORKS interface and were, I'll say, ported over to DraftSight. DraftSight is still being developed and evolves, and they add more functionality. Most of your other 2D CAD packages are kind of stagnant. They just want to sell it, go use it. We're not going to improve it any. So DraftSight still has improvements that are ongoing and actually in every version. So here you see the familiar SOLIDWORKS interface, which has got the design manager on the left side. You have resources on the right and kind of a panel. You have the ribbons, you have a menu, and you have those toolbars, kind of the home toolbar, I'll say. So for DraftSight, you open it up, it looks very familiar. Now the graphics area is black. DraftSight has kind of two modes, if you will. You have model space, which is where most people work and they do their design work. And then there are two tabs down toward the bottom there that are called Sheet 1 and Sheet 2. That's paper space. A lot of legacy drawings in my company in particular, we did not use paper space in that other CAD package. When it first came out, it was very difficult to use, and we just said, no, we're not going to fool with that. It improved over the years, but generally speaking, you're probably going to encounter more modifications that you're going to need to make in model space. Now, in DraftSight, you have different workspaces, as they call them. In the upper left-hand corner there, you see this is called drafting and annotation. And you see that there is they call this a tool palette on the right side. You can add different things to it. We're going to see an example of this in a little while. But this is a way for you to kind of customize the interface without having to worry about trying to customize the ribbon and so forth. This is the classic interface. So this was legacy, but it's still in DraftSight today. That other CAD package, I believe, the 2D one, has abandoned this completely. The other CAD actually started as a DOS-based system. And the 12th release, R12 of it, was they added Windows extensions, so they worked on top of the Windows interface. And later on, then they made that more compatible. I actually started on release 13, which was abhorrent. It crashed incessantly because they were trying to convert everything over to the Windows interface natively instead of just putting a layer on top of the other one. So this is based on old school menus and toolbars. So if you were to click on one of these menus, then you see this gigantic list of other options, and then you see more toolbars up in the left side there underneath the menus. So the difference is, again, SolidWorks started as a Windows-based system, so it was fully developed with Windows in mind as opposed to the other one. Now, DraftSight had the option, I suppose, to just say, okay, well, we're going to just go with the Windows interface. But you have a lot of older users, which includes me, that worked with this other interface. So they kept it around in case you wanted to use that. But for the most part, we'd go ahead and you probably switch over to the newer interface. Everybody using the newer interface, you're probably not using the toolbars or any of that stuff, are you? Okay. So you have the feature manager, like I mentioned. Also in the feature manager, when you're in commands, you will get your options as far as like the fillet radius you're going to use and so forth. You don't get that in DraftSight, and we'll talk about that. As opposed to that, it's very command line dependent. Again, a lot of that is legacy from when before it was a Windows, or when the other CAD was a Windows, was not on Windows, it was on DOS. So a lot of your feedback is actually going to come from the command window. So we'll talk about that in a few minutes as well. One thing that throws new users for DraftSight off is the scroll wheel. So it's exactly the opposite of what DraftSight is. And the reason why is because the other CAD package was that way. So you would scroll towards the screen to zoom in, whereas opposed to in SolidWorks, you scroll away to zoom in. Now, in the options, you can flip that, and probably most of you have done that already if you're having to switch back and forth between those two CAD packages. So for SolidWorks users, the most familiar thing that you'll see in DraftSight is if you're creating a sketch. So created a sketch on the XY plane, drew a line, went ahead and used that nice feature where you draw the line, stop, go away, come back, and then switch to the arc tool, and then drew the rest of the lines. The dimensions were inferred. The relationships were all added automatically. It didn't matter what size. As soon as I said that the width was 6 and the height was 3, then that's exactly what I'm going to end up with. Now with DraftSight, you draw the entities to the exact scale that you want, or the exact values, and then you go back and add the dimensions. So they're kind of disconnected. The geometry drives the dimensions, as opposed to SolidWorks, where the geometry is constrained so that by the dimensions themselves. So, and in this case, this is kind of the same sketch, but in 2D in DraftSight, I had to use the fillet tool after the fact in order to add that radius down there. You don't have that option to go and sketch and go away from a line and go back to an arc. So some differences in object creation. So parametric feature-based objects. So once I've got that sketch, then I'm going to go ahead and do an extrude or whatever function I want, whatever I'm going to create. Units, as you all know, SolidWorks entities have units. DraftSight, like its predecessor, was completely unitless. So one meant 1 unit. It could be 1 inch, it could be 1 millimeter, it could be 1 mile. Didn't make any difference. You set up your dimensions in order to let the user know when you add them, you know, is it 1 foot, is it 1 inch, is it 1 millimeter? And like I said, so when you sketch the entities and you've got the constraints of the dimensions, that defines the geometry. With DraftSight, you have to go ahead and you have to draw those exactly to size, and then the dimension values reflect that size. Obviously, in SOLIDWORKS, you work with multiple planes. With DraftSight, you're really only concerned about the X and Y plane, just the one plane. I have seen layers used in SOLIDWORKS, but not very often. A lot of times it's because somebody brought something over and didn't realize that the layers were coming with them from a DWG file. But they're highly used in DraftSight. They are either used for to differentiate between things like dimensions, notes, object lines, maybe your sheet format, title block, and that's one way they're used. And then facilities drawings, if you deal with those, they are, again, highly dependent, but it's a little bit different use case. So is it the HVA system? Is it the electrical system? Is it furniture? So your layers are based on what types of objects they are, as opposed to maybe what types of entities they are, like lines and dimensions. As you know, models and drawings in SOLIDWORKS are separate documents. Now, the references are there. SOLIDWORKS maintains those, understands that this drawing is created from this model. DWG files mostly are one file. You have the entire drawing is in that one file. There is something called XREFs, short for external references. These are used a lot by architectural firms because they want to be able to split out like the HVAC. And when you've got a building, you've got all kinds of stuff on top of each other. So you can manipulate those layers in order to work with those. We're going to see an example of that in a minute. So you can automatically, when you create your views, the parametrics in SOLIDWORKS knows as soon as you drag over a view, front view, oh, here's the side view, here's the top view. You have to actually create those in 2D in DraftSight. You don't have automatic view creation, unfortunately. One other little interesting thing is in DraftSight there are 2 types of notes. And again, this goes back to legacy. So a simple note is essentially one line. Now, if you create a simple note and then you create another simple note right after it, they line up. But they're actually separate pieces of text, if you will. They have a multi-line note, which is more like a paragraph. So sometimes you have to keep in mind, if you're editing a legacy file, that you're going to change something. You're like, wait a minute now, why is that separate from that? Well, it's a simple note as opposed to, I think they call it a regular note now. Techniques. So I talked about the command window. So this is where you get your feedback in DraftSight. Now, typically it's docked at the bottom. We saw that in the screenshot earlier. One thing you can do, unfortunately, I couldn't really, I guess I could have taken a picture of 2 monitors, but you can undock this and float it somewhere else. You cannot dock it inside DraftSight on the right or left. So I did this in order for you to see the commands as they were entered. Okay, so when I drew that sketch that I showed you earlier, so I started at 0, 0, I added a line, and one thing I want to point out here in particular is ortho mode, orthogonal. There's a shortcut F8 key for that, and what that constrains your lines is at 90-degree increments. So essentially they're either horizontal or vertical. Use that quite a lot because a lot of what we sketch is horizontal and vertical lines as far as that goes. So every point that I add, so this all the feedback, it's asking me, what's the next point? What's the next point? What's the next point? And then finally, there's a close command, which took me back to the original point. So I didn't have to go find that point again. I just said, close the rectangle. And again, you won't see any radius because I haven't done the fillet in this case. Entity snaps. So as you know in SOLIDWORKS, when you've got those relationships and you hover over your entities, you may see kind of midpoint constraint, endpoint constraints, and so forth. Well, in DraftSight, we use snaps, entity snaps, e-snaps. So, and I can control which ones are available to me. So in this case, if I hover over an entity, like a circle, then the radius will highlight. If I highlight over a line, then I'm going to see the endpoint. So these are very important tools that you can use to help really draw entities at the correct scale and the way you want them. When I was designing in 2D, I used a lot of copy. I would create a line and then I would copy it. And there are several ways to do that. You know, there's a copy command, but I also used offset. So offset, just take something and offset it a line by a certain distance. I use the mirror command a lot, and I use the rotate command a lot. Now, rotate used to not have an option to copy when you rotated, but we do have that now. So that was a little bit difficult to overcome. And we talked about layers earlier. This is the layer manager in DraftSight. So we have a list of the layers. This would be more in line with, let's say, a mechanical drawing. So we have things like the annotations, so dimensions and notes, center, which I would probably use for center lines, object, and so forth. Now, again, going back to the way we used to do things, we have different colors for the layers. Typically don't do that in SOLIDWORKS, but it helps you determine which entities belong to which layer. Also, we control the line type. So if you look at the center, I've got a center line type associated with that layer. If you look at the objects, they're just a standard line. You can also control weights in here. Going old school, we used to control weights by the color. So when we would print something out, we would say, oh, if it's red, it needs to be a thin line. If it's green, it needs to be a thicker line. So, I mean, this goes back to like pen plotters. So let's look at some use case demos. I've got 3 different ones. We're going to modify a kind of a legacy drawing, and we're going to create a pneumatic schematic or just talk about how to do that, and then we're going to talk about working with a facility layout. So I'm going to switch over because we had some when I presented last year, we had a little difficulty with live demos. So I hate to do recorded stuff, but so F4 is the recent files list in DraftSight, so don't type R. R is refresh. So I'm going to open 2 files here. One of them's a detail and one of them's an assembly that contains the detail. Now, if you look, I've selected that dimension, and if you come down toward the bottom here, you're going to see that there's a value right now of 267 millimeters, I guess. It doesn't really care, but what we want to do is modify that so that it's 250 millimeters. So I'm going to use a command called stretch. The stretch command allows you to stretch, not only move entities, but also lengthen or shorten them. So there's a stretch command right there from the toolbar. So you can window from left to right, or you can do a crossing selection. So I just did this on purpose to show you that. So I don't have ortho on, and I also did the window select. So I'm not getting those endpoints of the file or the lines that I want to. So you escape to get out of the command, and then you can keep an eye down on the command window down there. So I switched over now I'm going to use the crossing, so right to left, and you'll notice the box was green instead of blue. And now I can kind of look at that, and I'm just going to enter the difference in the length, and you'll see now in the properties dialog over here, I've changed that to 150, okay? So I'm done, right? I just go rebuild my assembly and we're done. Except for one thing. Well, forgot about this. So I want to edit the title block and change the revision number. I have to do that manually. But once I'm done with it and I save it, that assembly file is completely disconnected from this. So I've got to go back, and I'm going to use my stretch command correctly this time, and I'm going to stretch those entities and shorten them by 17. And I remember this time, I'm going to go change that revision on the drawing and save that. So that's just a little example of doing a modification. Now for pneumatic or hydraulic schematics, I want to take advantage of the palette. So, and also templates. So let me pause for a second. So I have this template set up. You can have a grid in DraftSight set up for a certain X and Y direction spacing, and you can either turn it on or off. Now, when I was doing a lot of my mechanical design work, I had it off. It just got in my way. You'd have the thing snap to that grid. For a diagram, it's very helpful because it helps you place those symbols. So I started off with a template file, DWG file, that basically has my title block, and then so the F7 key is the one where you can toggle that grid on and off if it's getting in your way. And it's going to get in our way in a minute, and I'll show you why you would want to toggle that. So I'm going to open this palette. This is a tool palette. I've saved it in my resources over here on the left side, or on the right side of the screen. And so I have these arranged in folders. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into that folder, and then I have a tool palette. And a lot of these are included with DraftSight now. In fact, all of them except for and I'm going to window in, so that's the area I'm going to work in. All of them other than the pneumatics one that I'm using now are included in DraftSight. There's some architectural ones and so forth. I had to actually kind of build this one. I had to find some symbols to download. So I'm going to go to the FRL tab, and I'm going to drag in an FRL block. So I know we have blocks in SOLIDWORKS, but we don't use them very often for this purpose, I don't believe. Anyone's welcome to correct me. This block has metadata, if you will, associated with it. So, and I'm going to get a valve now. When you drop that in, you place it, and then it's prompting me for a number, which I could use for like a bill of materials. This is, the FRL is 1. I could spell out what the vendor is, where I'm buying it from. So there's a valve, and then I'm also going to grab a cylinder. And again, I'm entering not only like a number that I can use in a table, but also a description. So valve pusher, and then we're going to have a cylinder pusher as well. There's an option to add a third description line, but I just hit enter, so it's empty. Now, the other thing that I want to do is I want to go and add a design, something that I didn't have in my palette yet. Hard to see because the background is white, unfortunately, but you can zoom in there. So what I want to do is add an air control valve to this cylinder up here. So when I drag it in here, now the E-snaps, if you will, are getting in my, or not the E-snaps, but the snaps are getting in my way to the grid. So I've chosen to use F9 to toggle that off. Now my E-snaps can take over and I can actually snap to the end point of that port on the cylinder. And then I'm going to go, so once I've done that, now I have to save the drawing. Once I save the drawing though, save the drawing, Mike. Okay. I had a test one, so I just wrote over the top of it. So now I can go add that to my palette. So I can build up a library of symbols that I can use on my next schematic and so forth. And these can be exported, and then you can give them to colleagues, and they would be able to use them. So you can help build your own library of symbols, whether it's pneumatics, hydraulics. If you have some other symbols, you can do that as well. I've added a tab in my design palette here, in my tool palette, for air control valves. So I did not rename the blocks. I got these offline or online, got them off a website. I didn't rename their blocks. I said, okay, well, I'm just going to use my own name. So now I know what I'm going to pick the next time if I need one. The other thing you can put in a tool palette are objects or entities like lines, circles, and so forth. It makes more sense just to have lines here. Again, that grid is kind of, ortho. I need to turn ortho on and then move up and get that snap right there. That was my placement point. So that's going to be in the same place. But now I got a problem because that port there is not aligned with my grid. So I'm going to have to turn my grid off again and then go ahead and just add it to the end point and then go to the end of the cylinder. Okay? So these are the ones that are created, and then this is how you can export a tool palette and then share it with other users so that they can utilize it as well. So sharing that work that you've done with other ones. So facilities, this is actually something I downloaded from the internet, and fortunately this helped me out. You can save views so that you can reuse them. And I happened to go in this file. I didn't create this view. Somebody else did. And I said, I want to look at the floor plan. They already had one set up in there. So I said, well, I'll use that one. And we talked about layers earlier. So this layer is, this entity, this information about column locations and all is on a layer called axis. And it's kind of getting in my way for what I want to do. So I'm going to open that layer manager, and I'm going to go find the axis layer. Now you have options to show a layer, which is obviously what we're seeing here. You also have the option to freeze a layer. When you freeze a layer, it disappears. So why is that different from show or hide? It means that nothing can affect that. Then you have lock. So lock still shows up. It's kind of grayed out or disabled. And you see a little lock symbol. You cannot do anything to modify an entity on a locked layer. You can save a layer option as a in the layer manager. So it's a layer states manager. So what I want to do is I just want to go ahead and add I want to add a new layer set, if you will. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the doors, the things on the door layers, I want to lock those so that I won't accidentally work with those, modify them. Okay? So I'm going to freeze the doors. You see the padlock there, so it's frozen. Then I can switch back to where it's not frozen. So very convenient to go in between those different layers and affect how they are going to operate for you. So one other thing, I'm going to create a layer for some barrels that you see in the model. This is something that maybe a lot of people don't know, but you can have filters for entities so that it's easier to select them. And what I'm doing, I'm selecting those circles which represent barrels, and they all have the same radius. So what I can do is I can use the filter command, and I can build a filter. So I'm going to come down, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the radius of a circle, and I'm going to say if it's equal to 270, I think. Hard to see there. All those are equal. So I can use that filter. Even if I try to select all kinds of other stuff, only those 3 entities get selected. Now that those are selected, I can go into my properties panel and I can change the layer to that barrel layer that I created before. So it's a way to filter entities and be able to select them by size, by type, by line type. Very handy way to work with multiple files themselves or multiple entities themselves. Okay. Oh, Shift F5. I'll get in trouble for that. All right. Conclusion and discussion. So 2D is still important today, and I feel like it's not going to go away for a long time. Been around for centuries, actually, if you think about things that were done in the past. I guess 2D was cave drawings, right? But 3D and 2D are complementary. In certain instances, it doesn't make sense to have to use SOLIDWORKS. Might be simpler to go ahead and use DraftSight in particular for facilities, perhaps, or for diagrams. So DraftSight empowers SOLIDWORKS users with efficient tools. Again, I heard something earlier about if you have a hammer, all you use to drive nails is a hammer. So use the right tool for the right job. So I was just kind of open it up a little bit. How are you guys using 2D today? Anybody? Yeah, go ahead. Okay, so for plant layout, I'm going to repeat it. So plant layouts and your controls group, is that right? So you're doing kind of like electrical schematics or, okay. Okay, Anybody else? Oh.
Piping diagrams, so like P90, where it's like pneumatic symbols and things like that, so we counter that, electrical and large general range.
So you'll forgive me, I want to repeat it, but so you're using what for your pneumatics? You're using DraftSight for your pneumatics, and what else? Okay.
large scale assembly.
Large scale? Okay. Anybody else? Any use cases maybe that I haven't thought of?
Yeah, we'll do our detailed design in SolidWorks, and then whenever we're doing a jiggle arrangement, like if it's going in a big vessel or whatever, we'll take one of our views from SolidWorks, export that as a block, put that into DraftSight, and then that way you have a really nice jiggle arrangement that's easy to draw on DraftSight, but you get like a really beautiful looking, accurate equipment design from the SolidWorks.
So you're designing in SolidWorks and then you're creating DWG files for, to show customers and so forth, is that right? Yeah. So I didn't really cover that because I felt like for somebody who had used SolidWorks, I mean, obviously that's a good use case for creating not only DWG files from drawings, but also DXF files from flat patterns, things like that, that you want to do that in SolidWorks. Sometimes I know you have to clean up those DXF files. Hopefully if you got the settings right, maybe you don't need to, but that's another use case as well for 2D out of the box. Anybody else? No?
Packaging information. We've got a company that does our packaging, and they'll send us the 2D drawings of what that box layout is in flat.
So you're getting 2D drawings from outside, and then you have to manipulate them in DraftSight? Okay, all right. Okay. Well, I think we're about at time. Yes, sir. What?
Files, a lot of the simple 3D files, they only take some 2D formats, so a lot of times you want to use DraftSight for those folks who are looking for those other technologies.
So Revit models and then take like floor plans and things out of the Revit and bring them into DWG, and then you could use them in like facility layouts and things like that. Yeah.
Permit drawings.
Yeah. Permit drawings? Okay. Yeah, that's a good use case as well. Yes, sir.
DraftSight drawings like the red.
PDM? What's that? What about, I'm sorry, what about PDM? There's a PDM add-in for DraftSight. It's unfortunately I hammer them on this kind of. It's not as full featured as the one in SolidWorks. I hammer them on it because I do DraftSight and then I do PDM. But PDM it'll handle those XREFs as well. Okay, so like I said, my former company. The first thing we did, we were going to SolidWorks. We had a couple SolidWorks users. But the first thing we did is we imported over 200,000 DWG files and managed them in PDM. Now, we didn't use XREFs, but still, it will look at an XREF and handle that reference, and you'll see it in the Contains tab the same way you would with SolidWorks references as well. So, yeah, it really works well. PDM does. And that's either PDM Standard or PDM Professional. Okay? Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the conference. We'll see you next year.